return on investment of personalized experiences. So first, wrong way. Okay, we're gonna go back in time and then we're gonna go forward. All right, that's the first. The first step is not tripping coming up on the stage. Second is remote control, which way to go. So here we go. So as the introduction just said, I've been working in digital and personalization for quite a while. I started a marketing agency and sold that about 5 years ago. I then worked on a startup in the gig economy space, and since then have been working as a consultant with top brands, everything from Fortune 50 companies to Fortune 1000 and smaller, really on solving some of the challenges that I'm about to talk about today. And as mentioned, I have a podcast, written a few books on the topic as well. So first, let's start with defining what it is that we're talking about. So personalization, there's a lot of different ways to define it and approach it. I'm going to start with some statistics. So I'm sure you've seen similar, if not the same statistics. So 91% of consumers are more likely to shop with brands that provide relevant offers and recommendations. 80% of customers are more likely to purchase a product or service from a brand who provides personalized experiences. 76% of customers get frustrated when they don't have personalized experiences. So, what these and other similar numbers tell me is, again, not only is it a net benefit to have personalization and to offer personalized experiences, content, and other things, it's actually a detriment when you're not doing it. Customers have come to expect this. So what I'm going to talk about today is not so much, I'm accepting that you've accepted the premise that personalization is a good thing. I'm going to do less talk about why we should be doing it and a little bit more about how we actually do it and how we do it meaningfully and how we get a return on investment when we do personalization. So the ultimate goal is a few things here. So first, this idea that every customer gets a one-to-one experience. So every customer out there feels like the brand is speaking specifically to them. The offers that they get, the content that they see, all of those things, it really feels like it's for them. Even if they sit in a segment with a bunch of other audience members or customers, everything feels like it's a one-to-one communication. Second, the brands themselves. So the people sitting in this room, the brands out there are able to personalize across all of their channels. And I should say this is an ultimate goal. This is a North Star for all of us, because actually doing omni-channel, personalizing everything across all of your channels, it is tough to do. Even for very large organizations, they're able to do it on a few channels. They're definitely able to do it on one channel, one or two independently. But this cross-channel, this omni-channel personalization, it's tough, but it's what we need to try to achieve. Next thing, attribution. So multi-touch attribution. So not just saying, okay, the last thing that someone saw, let's attribute our success to that. It's starting to attribute every step along the way. When we start doing omni-channel, meaning, customers are hitting all of these different touch points, we need to be able to see, okay, an investment in several of these different channels in different combinations. We need to be able to start seeing where our money is going, what combinations of advertising spends are most successful, and how to really move that needle. And then finally, the end goal really is increased customer lifetime value. So the premise here is when we offer a more personalized customer experience, when it feels one-to-one, when we're able to personalize across all the channels and really determine what is successful across all those channels, we are going to have more valuable customers. They're going to stay with us. They're going to spend more money and just stay customers longer. So personalization, there's a few different categories that I look at this in. So the first category is the scale of the personalization. So one-to-one is really that North Star. It is what we are trying to achieve. To start, we may do things like audience segmentation. So grouping a lot of people, a lot of customers into different segments. This is being done a lot today. You're probably doing this in some fashion. Email marketing is done in this way. You don't send a million different combinations of emails out. You send a few out to different audience segments. Next section, context. So, and I'll go into more detail about this, but is it prescriptive or is it adaptive? And then the last category is reach. So I'll dive into each of these a little bit more. So first one is scale. I already touched on this a little bit, but it's really how granular we want to personalize. Do we want to start with that one-to-one? Do we have the resources to do one-to-one personalization? I'm going to talk about that in a minute as well. Actually doing one-to-one personalization, it doesn't just take platforms and technology, it also takes resources to create those different content variations. So what's the scale that we actually want to personalize at? So, from that segment, again, you're probably doing this to some degree. If you're doing advertising, you're advertising to different segments. You might have different ads going to different audience segments. I might use the email example. The aim here, again, producing better business results, being a little more specific, but again, not doing necessarily a one-to-one targeting. So one-to-one, this really is managing and delivering that optimal experience on a one-to-one basis. This means you need a lot of information, a lot of data about your customers as well. So there's a lot of investments that need to be made. I'll talk about this a little bit more in a minute. So then we get to context. And so the first category, so these are external inputs. This means that the brand is defining the methods and controls for the personalization as opposed to user-defined inputs. So in other words, we are saying, as a brand, we're going to define what the context is that we're personalizing, as opposed to a user saying, okay, I'm on this page, I'm on this channel, I'm in this place, because it can also be in a real world scenario as well. Those are two different ways of looking at context. And so, from an explicit personalization standpoint, the visitor's profile determines what content they'll see, and the user can change the content as per their needs. So an example, when you're logged into Facebook, you see your profile data, you see your friends' data, all of those things. When you log out, you don't see that. So it's based on your profile, your information that you've provided. If you don't provide something to Facebook, for instance, you're not going to see something based on that in theory, although they track us a lot, so they know a lot about us. But so implicit personalization, this is the user's past browser history determines what content they will see. So again, it's not something that I give intentionally. It's something I went to a website, cookie was placed on my machine or on my browser, and therefore I'm kind of followed around by those third-party cookies. So this is implicit personalization. And then adaptive personalization is this is when what I do changes what happens over time. So again, it's not looking in my past history. It's not I'm landing on a page and the context around me determines what personalizes the experience. It is, I land on a website, let's say, and I take a series of actions. And as I navigate through that experience, the experience starts personalizing itself around my behaviors. So again, system automatically adapts itself, and it might provide options that weren't previously there because of what I've done just now, not what I did a month ago or anything like that, but what I'm actually doing in real time. So a weakness of segmentation is you have to set up a logic for every segment or block of users that you wish to target. With adaptive personalization, what the user actually does and how they behave actually starts to set the context of what they do, as opposed to trying to determine 10 steps ago what you think they might be doing. And then the last category of personalization is reach. And so we can look at this as how broadly personalization is available across the customer experience. So how many platforms, this goes into that omni-channel versus single channel versus multi-channel, how many platforms and channels are working seamlessly together to provide a personalized experience, content, offers, you name it. So we have single channel personalization. A lot of organizations are doing this right now. It's a very limited way of personalizing things, but again, if you go to a website and you land on a page and start seeing things personalized, but then you go on the same brand's mobile app or you open your email and those things are not connected with one another, that's going to be single channel personalization. Because again, one channel is personalized, but everything else is not. And so there's frustration there because, again, when I went to their website, the experience was great. Anytime I interact with the brand on other channels, I feel like they don't understand me or they don't remember what I did previously. So single channel, not an optimal experience. Multi-channel, this is one step better in a sense. So this is where multiple channels, but not all channels are working together. So this might be an email combined with a website experience. So you get a personalized email in your inbox. When you get to the website, you see content that is personalized to something that was just in your shopping cart or content that you just browsed and saw or something like that. And so you have that good experience across those two channels. But if you add another channel to the mix, perhaps it's not personalized. So again, there's personalization, but it's within limits. And so, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the platforms that are needed, but there's a number of different things that are needed to even do rather simple multi-channel personalization well. And then again, finally, we have this idea, this holy grail kind of omni-channel personalization. And so this is across every channel of your brand. It provides that personalized experience. Again, I will say most brands are not doing this across every channel. They're trying to do this. Some are more successful than others. Some are very successful across many, many channels, but not necessarily all of them. Some have some parts of it personalized, but not all parts. So if you're feeling like you're not quite there yet, you're certainly not alone. But this is really where everybody needs to get to, because again, your customers really are not distinguishing between what device they're using, what platforms they're using. They're picking up their phone if it's in front of them, they're calling, they're using their laptop, they're doing what's convenient to them. They're not thinking about, oh, okay, well, when I use this one channel, I get a personalized experience, but when I use this other one, I don't. We have to start thinking from our customers' perspective, which is they're what I would call device agnostic. They're not thinking about what device they're going to use. So the infrastructure that's needed to do this has grown, and it continues to grow in complexity. So there's a few different categories. I'll just kind of touch on these briefly. So there's the customer data component. So these are things like CDP, so a customer data platform, CRM. Probably a lot of you are familiar with that as well. Customer relationship management. So that's the Salesforces, the Dynamics, all those kinds of platforms. DMPs. Anybody doing advertising certainly interacts with a data management platform. A CMP, that's a consent management platform. So I'm not going to talk a lot about that today, but with data privacy issues, it is absolutely necessary to get consent to send people emails, to collect information about them. So all of these platforms work together to really provide that view of the customer within the organization. So that holistic view of the customer. So from an activation standpoint, so there's a few things here. So there's content management, so serving content. A lot of websites use content management systems, but content management systems are used for a lot of other purposes these days as well, especially what's called headless CMS can be used across any channel, any device to serve content. There's orchestration platforms or next best action platforms that really allow orchestrating a customers here, they need to get all the way over here. So how do we get them there? How do we personalize the content along the way? Somewhere in between that are things like marketing automation. So a lot of you may be doing triggered emails or things like that, where someone takes an action and they get an email sent to them. Orchestration is kind of the next step beyond that. And then there's testing platforms, so multivariate testing, optimization. That really comes in handy when you're doing a lot of personalization, just kind of seeing what is going to work with what audiences. From an analysis standpoint, I know several people here have already talked about analytics and analysis. I won't spend a lot of time talking about it, but certainly reporting, having a feedback loop and understanding about all of this stuff is critical here. And in addition to a feedback loop of the analytics, having a feedback loop of the processes that you use. So it's not just about is each customer performing, but is the organization that's serving this content and personalizing these experiences, how are we performing as an organization in order to get better and improve over time? So let's talk a little bit more about the data personalization. I'll split this up into a few categories as well. So, the first thing to know is, as I said already, customers, they're wanting these personalized experiences. They want to solve challenges. They have a challenge to solve, whether that's they need to buy something, they need to solve another problem in their lives. Businesses, though, not only need to help customers solve their problem, but they also need to realize value, because this stuff gets expensive. It gets expensive, it gets time consuming, it gets resource intensive to provide a lot of different options, a lot of variations, a lot of different personalized offers, content, experiences for all of these different audiences. And so businesses have to find a way to realize value. So whether that's customer lifetime value, revenue per session, if you're e-commerce, other things like that, there has to be a way to realize return on this in order to connect these two dots. And so great personalization requires a few things. It's great data, it's strategic application of that data, and it's continuous improvement to make sure that those experiences get better and better. If for no other reason, continuous improvement is important because your competition continues to get better and better. And so to keep up your experiences with your competition is increasingly important. So I look at the data of personalization in a few different ways. There's customer-specific data, and then what I would call ownership-specific. So customer-specific, this is the demographic data. Who am I? Contextual data. This is where am I? Where am I within the customer journey? Where am I within the world? Am I geographically, or am I in a store, a brick and mortar store? Am I online? And then behavioral. What do I do? What have I done? What is predicted that I will do? And then the second category of that is the different types of data. And so there's third-party data and second-party data, which is similar enough. These are things that you as a brand do not own. You are collecting this, others are collecting this on your behalf, so to speak. There are increasing guidelines. Anybody doing business in Europe is familiar with GDPR. California has their own kind of version of this, CCPA. This is becoming more and more prevalent, that there are guidelines restricting and the usage and the collection of third-party data. So there's a lot coming down the pike with that. Google's getting a lot more strict with that. They're going to start phasing out third-party cookies. Anyone that does a lot of advertising, I'm sure you're already aware of this, but it's going to make things a little bit challenging, to say the least. Mobile device tracking, already Apple and others are taking steps to anonymize and do some things there to make it a little more challenging. So third-party and second-party data is still always going to be important to a degree, but what's really becoming more important is first-party data as well as zero-party data. So first-party data, this is data that a brand collects directly from its customers when they go to your website, when they go to your app, when they anything that you're able to collect about an individual. The difference between first-party and zero-party Zero party just means I'm giving you willingly my data. So when I fill out a form as a customer and submit it to a brand, that's what would be considered zero party data. A lot of times first party and zero party are kind of lumped into the same because they're both owned by the brand, and the brand has the rights to use those as long as there's the legal nomenclature and all that stuff in place. So those are two types of data that are definitely needed for personalization. So the individual specific data, it's defined by its relationship to the customer and the way it's able to describe an individual. So these are, again, things that help us target products or experiences or other things to an individual based on who they are, what they like doing, and things like that. Demographic, all of those things, age, gender, ethnicity, all of those things that we're able to collect about an individual, so then we can target things that are of relevance to them. Contextual provides perspective into a customer or their experience. So again, what the context is, where it is, how it's collected. Talked about that a little bit already, but a few different ways of looking at contextual data here. So last item purchased gives us perspective, personal information, date of last customer service call. So if we know that someone just called customer service yesterday and complained, would we do something different? Would we try to push an offer on them today if we know that they're kind of unhappy, or do we want to give them a little bit of time, a little bit of breathing room? The amount of time that customers spend on hold, for instance, many different things that we can then stitch together to learn and understand more about customer behavior and how to personalize for them. And then, last behavioral data, as I was mentioning before. So data collected from a customer's interactions and engagements, so website, email, subscriptions, all of those things really, can be considered behavioral data. So the ownership specific, I know I talked about this a little bit, but really determined by its relationship to the brand, how that information is collected, and the entity or party that can claim ownership over it. And so, as I mentioned, there's these four categories here. So again, I will say the first party and zero party data are what brands really need to start focusing on, because there are going to be more and more challenges over using third-party data. So, if you're a company that has not traditionally collected a lot of first-party information from your customers, it's time to definitely start doing that. I know a lot of CPG brands, for instance, have not traditionally collected a lot of first-party data, but they've started to much more recently, started doing things like subscription services or other things. They call them brand gardens, sometimes just ways of collecting data about customers, because they're going to start having more and more challenges getting access to this third-party data and things like that. So now that we kind of talked about the infrastructure, the data and everything, let's talk about some of the pain points of doing personalization well. So brands need to approach personalization and personalized content in a way that is cost-effective. So I mentioned this can be resource intensive. So they need to find a way to do personalization that can be achieved operationally without being overly burdensome on content creators. Again, think about if you have a team that's stretched pretty thin right now creating content, writing, creating graphics, all of a sudden you tell them, okay, now you're going to have to create 5, 10, 20 different variations of everything that you're doing right now. You're potentially going to have some unhappy team members. So, we need to find a way to make this not overly burdensome. It has to be measurable. If you're putting the time into this, if you're doing all of these variations, personalizing content, you have to figure out what works, because efficiency is going to be key. It may be that modifying images and personalizing those are not nearly as effective as modifying words, and therefore don't spend the time modifying images. Don't task your team with doing that if there's other ways of doing it that are more effective. And then, ultimately ROI driven. So what is the goal that you want to achieve? Is it the customer lifetime value? Is it revenue per session? What is the ROI goal that you want to achieve? Optimize everything that you're doing to those kinds of goals. So a few areas where personalization runs into roadblocks: technology challenges. So do you have the right infrastructure and tools in place? I showed a few different high-level descriptions of systems that might be needed, but a lot of times there's a matter of one system not talking to another. And so, you have a great idea, you'd like to do a lot of things, personalize a lot of things, but system A simply won't talk to system B. So technology challenges is a challenge. Cross-team collaboration. At large organizations, it can be a challenge to even pull data sets so that you can understand what audience segments are even available to target. So, this cross-team collaboration, it could be your graphic design team and your marketing team, all of a sudden changing your approach to do more personalization can cause friction. So lots of things to uncover there. Data challenges. So, do you have 3 different CRMs in your organization? Depending on the size of some orgs that I work with, that's the case. So they're comparing data sources one to another and trying to reconcile between all of these different systems. So, what are your data challenges that would get in the way of personalizing things better? Time and resource requirements. So I mentioned, just the time that it can take to create different variations. If your team's already stretched thin, what can you do to alleviate that? Sometimes there's third-party vendors that you can work with to do that. Sometimes there's systems that can create variations easier for you, just automations and things like that. Attribution challenges. So going back to the measurement component of this, when you do all of this personalization, can you actually determine, is it working? How is it working? What channels does it work best on? What channels do you need to improve? So, are you able to actually measure all the way throughout the process, or are you only able to measure at the very end and see, okay, yes, we got a few more sales, but we don't know why? Sometimes that's almost worse than knowing that there is a challenge somewhere and a roadblock that you need to uncover. So attribution becomes key as well. So, from a platform perspective, as I mentioned briefly already, but, customer data platforms, if you don't already have one, chances are you're talking about it. But for those that are less familiar with the concept, this is really let's call it the external facing version of a CRM. So your Salesforce and your marketing team are using CRMs right now to everything from collecting sales data to collecting emails and things like that for marketing. The customer data platform is really there to collect data from all external sources, stitch those profiles together. So somebody's on their mobile phone and then they go to their laptop, check email. It is a CDP's job to stitch all that stuff together so that you can actually have a unified view of a customer. So CDPs are exceptionally good at that. They work hand in hand with a CRM. I mentioned consent management for the data privacy issues, data management platforms for that third-party data. I have a little asterisk there because DMPs in general, there's a bit of a question mark on some of them. They're always going to be used. I mean, advertising is always going to be done, but there are many DMPs right now that are undergoing a bit of a change just because of the coming third-party data challenges and things like that. So certainly important to make sure that the ones that you use, the way that you're approaching, are thinking a year and a half ahead of time. Google's, I think they keep changing their dates, but I think about a year and a half from now, they're saying they're going to retire third-party cookies. So certainly keep that in mind as you're making investments in DMPs and really all of this stuff. So in addition to those that I mentioned, some beneficial platforms, so multivariate testing tools. There's things like Optimizely, even Google Optimize is a free tool that does this, allows you to do A/B testing. Comparing different content, different images, so you can start seeing what works. When you're able to tie those multivariate testing tools into a CDP, for instance, you're then able to start personalizing on a one-to-one or at least on an audience segment basis. So you're actually able to see what personalized content is actually working with which audience segment. Customer journey orchestration. This is really tying the end-to-end customer journey really from start to finish in many cases. So before, pre-acquisition of a customer, all the way through once they become a customer, you're able to orchestrate really what they see, how they see it. It's really taking things like marketing automation to the next step. Integration platforms as a service. So these are sometimes micro tools that allow you to connect different platforms together. They can be very low code or no code. So, helpful for those that are not software engineers. You can use them to connect dots together and really enable, when a customer does this, then send them this communication or put them in this audience segment, things like that. Product recommendation tools, also very beneficial as well, and some data and reporting tools. If you don't have a sophisticated BI tool or something like that, definitely time to invest in that and connect it to some of these other platforms. So there's also kind of a philosophy at companies of a build versus buy, and so I've worked with a few organizations that could attribute themselves to each. And so the build mentality is, okay, we've got software engineers on staff, we're going to build up the solutions to our challenges versus buying off the shelf. The pros of building it yourself is you can build exactly what you need. It integrates with your existing systems. You know exactly what went into it. You can maintain it, all of those kinds of things. Buying things off the shelf certainly has a lot of pros as well. There's, the time to value is generally shorter because you are literally picking something off the shelf, implementing it. It works, day one, generally speaking. Integrations can sometimes be easier because you're working with something that has a more mature product lifecycle and APIs and things like that. And, often part of your subscription is paying for upkeep, maintenance, all of those kinds of things. From a cons perspective, if you build things yourself, the time to value can be longer. I mentioned it being shorter with the buy. It's going to take you to a little bit longer to build something that is as mature as something that's been in existence for several years. So even though it can be built exactly to your specifications, it might take a little bit longer to get to a full-featured product. Sometimes it can be more difficult to maintain because you've got to integrate with a lot of different systems, APIs, things like that. And so your team, whoever's creating this product and building it from scratch, has to keep up on all of those APIs. So versus if you subscribe to something, that's kind of their job. You're outsourcing that component to them. Some cons from buying, you have less influence over what the product does, over what features get added. So if you really, really need a feature, you're, 10th, 100th, 1000th in line, depending on how many customers they have. So that can be a bit of a challenge if the product that you buy is a little bit lacking in some of the features that you need. Sometimes some of those systems may or may not work great with some of your existing systems. So as opposed to building it yourself, what it's gonna need to integrate with. If you buy it, it may work great with some, it may not work as well with others. So another, with data challenges, creating that unified view of the customer across challenges is definitely a major challenge. And again, this is why a customer data platform or a CDP becomes so beneficial. But this is really the challenge to understanding that customer and building that personalized view, is really connecting the dots between all of your different platforms. From an attribution standpoint, that fuller view of the customer, you want to understand what actually influences customer purchase behavior, other desired actions. So, there's common ways of attributing our first touch or last touch. So in other words, if someone comes straight from an advertisement, you assume that advertisement gets the credit for them making the purchase, when It might be that they searched for your company or your product a month ago, they landed on your website, and then you retargeted them because they did land on your website. They ended up clicking an ad and then purchased. But that initial search behavior, that initial browsing on your website isn't even tracked in that last touch scenario. First touch would, of course, be the inverse, be the very first thing that they did. And so multi-touch really takes into account, it gives weighting to all of the different steps that they took. It doesn't necessarily give equal weighting to each, but it does give attribution to each of those steps. So you can start seeing, okay, when we advertise, but when we also are active on social, we have a much better response than just touching a customer on one single channel. From a unified customer ID standpoint, being able to tie that customer's information together from one channel to another is critical. Again, if somebody searches for you on their smartphone and then they end up going to your product page on their laptop, if you're not able to stitch together those customer IDs, you're not going to know that it was actually that same person. You're not going to know that that person searched for you and then they purchased a week later or whatever the scenario is, and you're going to miss a key part of the consumer behavior. From a cross-team collaboration standpoint, really just understanding, this is just a quick table here to show, all of the different teams that may have to touch a personalization effort. So, we've got the marketing team filled out here, marketing team responsible for website, social, email, advertising. But we've also got a content team, we've got a data analytics team, we've got an engineering team, customer service team, customer experience team. What works really well is to have working groups that actually think and meet and talk about this on a regular basis. It's not just enough for marketing to say, hey, I need this stuff and trust us, we're going to personalize all this. It really helps for everyone to get together to talk about this, to understand what some of those challenges are. You might not know the effort that it actually takes to create the content that is required for personalization, but sitting down, talking to them, understanding is going to give you a better view of that. Same thing with the other teams mentioned here. From a time and resource perspective, as I mentioned, it just simply takes time to create more variations of things. Pretty obvious point, of course, but while it's spread across different time but different roles and resources, it still takes that time. And so, a few things here. You're going to run into immediate roadblocks if you don't have enough information about your customers. You're going to run into immediate roadblocks also if you're not able to get customers to provide meaningful data about themselves. So it's one thing if you have all the information, if you have all those IDs stitched together, but on the flip side, if you have incomplete information about customers, it's also a challenge. So you also do need to understand, where are the gaps? Is it a matter of one system not talking to another? That's an internal challenge. If it's, I know a little bit about this person, but I don't know enough to actually send them personalized communications, then you need to start and create strategies to actually collect more information about your customers. As I mentioned, the shift to third party, a big way to kind of fill in gaps on customer data is to pull it in from third parties. When there become more and more challenges pulling in that third-party data, it means that you as a brand need to find ways to do that yourselves. So you need to start coming up with strategies to do just that. So some ways to do this, I'm sure there's many more, but having contests or gated content, doing things that gamify things, loyalty programs been around for decades. This is why some industries are very well set up for third-party data issues. Is they've had loyalty programs for years. They understand a lot about their customers. But again, if you're the kind of company that hasn't done those kinds of things, and all of a sudden you're not going to be able to rely as much on third-party data, you have to start thinking of some of these ideas. We've seen a huge move to subscription-based offerings from companies that years ago never would have considered a subscription. There's a lot of reasons for this. Recurring revenue is certainly another great reason for that, but another good reason for doing subscription-based revenue models is that you get more information about your customers, you get more regular interactions from your customers. So, other strategies to get more data about your customers so you can then continue to tailor offers to them. So, it's not about solving all of the challenges right away, but you need to start being aware of what those challenges are and managing conflicts as they occur. So again, if you have a data conflict, if you have a technology conflict, try to figure out where those are, where your customers are seeing challenges. If the common example is calling up, I called up my bank the other day, I had to give them my account number 3 different times. When there's issues like that, your customer is feeling it. There's obviously a reason why that's happening. Systems are not talking to one another or something like that, but your customers are feeling that. They're feeling the disconnect, and solving that, even though it might seem like a little thing to a customer, it may be a huge gap within internal infrastructure within your organization. So you need to find a way to start solving those things. So from a measurement standpoint, since we're here to talk about ROI as well, so how do you measure personalization? So there's a few different ways I look at this. So first category would be scale, a second category would be audience, and then the last category would be process. And I'll talk a little bit about each here. So from a scale perspective, we can look at incremental measurements. So what does a personalized experience look like versus a non-personalized? So again, when we just do stuff out of the box, when everyone sees the same thing, do we get lift when we actually personalize that experience? We can do cross-channel versus single channel. So again, an incremental, we're not making a wholesale change. We're not scrapping everything and making a one-to-one omni-channel personalized experience. We're just doing things incrementally versus some holistic measurement of when we personalize the experience, do we get a greater customer lifetime value? That takes a while to measure. That's not something that you're going to measure in a week and come back and say, yes, we did it. That is something that you have to invest in over time. You can look at audience segment performance. So you can personalize to one segment versus another, for instance, even, and see, are different segments performing better when we personalize to them? We can look at multi versus omni-channel. If you're able to connect all your platforms together, does it work better when we actually have that omni-channel, as well as looking at things within journey stages. So you could actually look at that initial pre-purchase stage, purchase stage, post-purchase. You can look at optimizing personalization in those different elements, or you can look at the holistic customer journey, which would be something like customer lifetime value. And again, this definitely requires multi-touch attribution to do well. So from an audience perspective, we can look at audience segments. So again, dividing our audience, our consumer base into smaller segments. Sometimes dividing them into personas can be useful as a starting point. So that's another way to look at it. Or we can look at segments as far as journey stages. So as we get from that acquire phase, that's where they purchase a product. The activate is where we try to keep them engaged and continually buying. So we can look at audience from that perspective as well. And then ultimately, we want to look towards this one-to-one, this individual customer, optimizing it to them. And then the third category is process. I feel like this one's often a bit overlooked. We look at the audience and we look at other things, but what are the systems and the methods used to perform personalization, and how do those systems perform, as well as how are they improved? So I'm a big proponent of Agile processes and methods. Agile is certainly a great way to do that. It is a system, when done well, it is a system of continuous improvement. And so, finding ways to, how are we doing things today? How are we going to increment that? It's not just enough to have these things in place, but we have to continually make them better. if for no other reason your competition is continuing to make their processes better as well. And so, we can do this in a number of ways, but, creating hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, using essentially the scientific method, define a question, make a prediction, test the prediction, analyze the data, draw a conclusion. Did we do well, or do we need to do better? If so, let's either go back to the drawing board because it was the wrong question, or if we think we can do incrementally better, let's just continue to improve that. And then from an efficiency standpoint, Agile sprint-based methods, there's certainly other ways to do it, but Agile is certainly a way that works really well. The sprint-based approach, not biting off too much, but doing things in reasonable chunks, and then revisiting, talking about not only how well did we do, but how well did we perform as a team and work as a team. Finding ways to automate things. Not everything has to be done from scratch or manually, so finding ways to improve efficiency that way, as well as utilizing things like AI and other tools to do that. And then implementing, sharing files, sharing content, all of those kinds of things. I know we're a little short on time here. The last thing here, just talking about feedback loops. And again, this is about understanding your customers better, but it's as much about that as it is about working together as a team, how your systems are working, how your people, how your teammates are working together. So, I think all of these things working together to really continually improve. And so, a few things to do, define your KPIs, measure things over time, create a roadmap in order to get where you need to go. Time's up here, so I'll just kind of skip ahead a little bit here. But map where you want to go. Pilot projects, I'm a huge fan of those. Pick something small and achievable. Work towards this omni-channel, this one-to-one goal. Have a few slides to get through here. Think about ways to collect that customer data. If you have incomplete customer data, and things like that. And then, think about creating a steering committee, a working group, or something like that within your organization. This is, again, a way where you can share information, where you can talk about some of these challenges as well as some of the opportunities. And so, again, as we talk here, the ultimate goal really is increasing that customer lifetime value through one-to-one personalization, omni-channel personalization across the journey, as well as multi-touch attribution. Thanks so much.